I'm going to show you an implementation of the new Azure AD Cloud Sync. Now, we've all been using the original Azure AD Connect for quite a few years now, and although fundamentally it works great, there are certain limitations that you need to be aware of when you're implementing this, especially if you want to have multiple sources of identities coming into a single M365 tenant. With Azure AD Connect, we had to employ various mechanics like domain trusts and connections to other domain controllers so that the single AD Connect server could feed those identities into the tenant. And that's why the new Azure AD Cloud Sync is quite simply a revelation. It allows us to place agents on any machine in a domain and have it feed the M365 tenant identities based on either OU or group membership. We could have agents pulling data from domains that don't even know about each other and transform those entities into Azure AD, all coexisting beautifully, providing a much simpler approach to identity management. And now I sound like a walking brochure right now, an Azure fanboy for sure, but let me show you how easy this is, and then you will definitely understand my excitement here. Let's start then with the domain that I'm talking about for this example. So we're just going to run up just quickly and have a look at the domains that we have in place here. So if we have a look at domains and trusts, you'll see we've got our master domain here, but also we have some additional UPNs available, which are these two here, which we're going to use for some transformation on the new tenant. Now, if I have a look at the main domain itself, you can see property-wise, we have a functional level of 2012 R2 and the same for the forest level. Now, that is important because that really is the minimum level that we need to be. And also the minimum to install the Azure AD Cloud Sync agent is going to be 2016 or above. So there's two key things you've got to have there. And let me show you as well the tenant here. You can see a standard 365 developer tenant. And if I look at the domains we have loaded in there, we have three, obviously the default one, and we have the server 2022 and the cloudgeezer.com. You'll notice that that other domain we had in one of the UPMs, the blah blah blah.com, is not registered in here, and that's what I want to use for one of those transformation effects as we go through the demonstration here. Something we also need before we can get the agent connected is it does need two things to be able to talk to the local domain and also the tenant. The local domain, we have to set it up as a domain admin. That will create the group managed service account automatically because that's what it uses for that connection into the domain itself and get all the identities out. But it does need to have a service account on the tenant itself. So if we look at the active users here, you can see I've created one like this, and that's also a GA as well, just to make sure it can write in correctly. Those are the only two identities I've got set up at the moment. I want to have a nice fresh tenant to show you so that it can flood in with all these identities from this particular domain. Now, everything we do on the agent itself is controlled from the tenant. So once it's got the service account and it knows where to talk to and gets registered, then we do everything from here. So if I go into the Azure AD here, you'll see that if I jump into here, Azure AD, and we go down to Azure AD Connect, but you'll notice that none of this has been set up yet. And we're actually going to use this one here, which is Manage AD Cloud Sync. We're not going to do anything with downloading Azure AD Connect or the what I would consider the old way of doing it. We're going to jump into here. So let me just show you around this one very quickly. Really, this will show us the different configurations of all the agents. So when you have your different domains connected, they are going to show up as different configurations in here. And likewise, if I have a look at these, look at the agents, you'll see right now there's nothing in there. We haven't installed anything yet. So what we do is we hit the download agent, and that will give us the executable we need to run, and it will just drop onto the machine. I'm going to actually go back to the machine we're going to be installing on, because that's where I have actually installed that executable, so we can run it from there. But really, we just need to get that particular agent set up on that machine we're going to be running it from. This is our 2016 box. You can see I've put the setup file on the desktop. So we'll just run that one now. And we just get the normal agree and install. Now it does need .NET 4.8. So if you don't have that on your 2016 box for whatever reason, you might want to put that on first. But I obviously did that ahead of time. And you can see it just runs through the normal configuration, which if it doesn't find any issues, it will happen very quickly. if you're trying to do this on either an old domain or a machine that's not a 2016 box, it's going to pause around about here and obviously have some issues because it just can't quite simply make that group managed service account for you. See, in this case, it is actually running through quite nicely, and will give us the configuration screen right after this. And here we go. So really on this, we just have to hit next. And the two things we're going to give it is going to be the Azure AD and the service account locally. So hit the authenticate, and it's going to want us to sign into 365. So with this, I'm just going to paste in the service account, next, and password. So hitting authenticate then gives us the option to put this in. I'll just paste the service account in there and give it the password too. And that will continue with that connection. Now this is where we create the group managed service account. So in this one, we're going to give it the domain admin credentials of the domain so we can get that created. Now, as this is a dummy domain, effectively, I have just left it as administrator, or maybe not. So here we put in the administrator, spell, that, and that will just validate those and create that for us. Now, you can see this is a screen which you would have seen previously on Azure AD Connect. Previously, you'd be aware of this type of layout, but we're just going to hit next on this. And you can see it's now going to go ahead and set up the agent with the credentials we gave it. So we just hit confirm there, and it will go away and create that group managed service account and finalize the connection. And just note as well that it can take a few minutes to actually do that and doing the registration of the agent and the account and the like. So just be patient with it, and it will make those connections and do that for you. With this now being complete, I'll exit from here. I do just want to show you just quickly the service that gets created. You can see here it's the Microsoft Azure AD Connect provisioning agent. And if we look inside here for the logon, you'll see it's got the group managed service account. Now just have a quick check over on the domain controller, just in users and computers there, and look at the managed service accounts. You can see there's our account which has been created, just to tie that all together nicely for you. So at this point, the work on the local service is all done. Now we jump back into the tenant itself, and we can have a look at these. So if we just go back in here, and as you would normally start, you'd click on the Manage AD Cloud Account. You can see still we have nothing in here. Now you'll notice though, we have the option light up to say New Configuration. And this is because it knows that there's a new agent that is talking to the tenant. So if we hit New Configuration, we can now configure really what we want that one to look like. So we keep the cloudgeezer.com as its domain, and we hit create, and that jumps us straight into the configuration. So we want to talk about a little bit about the scope. Now, generally the default is it will take all users from this domain. We're going to cull that down a little bit. The preferred method is the organization units, but for this demo, we're just going to use security groups like this. And we do need the distinguished name of the object, the DN. So we're going to go across and grab that, because if I look back at my domain controller, what I've done here is under these business units, I've made a security group called Azure AD Cloud Sync, and I'm just going to drop the users into this security group for the ones I want to sync. Now, if I want to grab that DN, I'm going to need to go and make that advanced features, And under these business units, we just go in here and have a look at the attribute editor. We'll just make it easier, just values. And really we can see this is the DN here. So we're just going to grab that and copy that out. And just jump straight back in here and paste that in there and add that in. So once that's done, we have one scoping requirement there. Now also we're going to look at the mappings. Now this is something I'm going to come back to in just a little while, but the mappings are very important for any changes you want to make. If we have a look at those, you'll see that we have all the different attributes in AD and how they're going to map into Azure AD. And you can see down here on the left, you can also see what mapping type it is. Is it a direct mapping? Is it an expression or a constant perhaps? So you can see here we have the city, which is a trimmed version, which is an expression, or common name, which is a straight direct mapping. So like I say, we'll come back to those shortly, but they are quite interesting to look at. So really, validation wise, we can provision a single user just as a test. If we were doing it with an existing tenant that had a lot of identities in there, we're just mapping across everybody, we probably would do that. I'm going to use this this particular demo just to flood them through. I'm not worried about that for now. We don't really need a notification email for this demo. You'd put your name in there if you want to know really what's going on. You want notifications about the agent and if there's any issues or any other provisioning problems that it has. And then here I'm just going to say enable once we are ready to go and save that. And once that's ready, it will then let us just jump back to the main screen. And you can see now we have in our configuration, we have a healthy one. Hasn't done a lot yet. We're still waiting for that to sync. It will do a sync every 2 minutes. It's going to ask the agent if there's any changes, and then it'll push those through. So you may end up seeing in your logs that there may not be any activity on the agent for quite some time if there's no changes being made. As long as it says healthy here, then you are certainly in good shape. And if I do the review all agents that we looked at before, you can see now it's picked up the name of the machine it's coming from and the external IP address that it is connected from as well. So we have a look at our logs. You can see right now there will be nothing in there. Now that is because we don't have anybody in that group yet. It hasn't been told to do any work. So let's go ahead and do some of that. So we jump back to our domain controller and come out of what we were in before. But I want to have a look at this group and look at the members. You can see there's nobody in there right now. What I'll do it the other way around. I'm just going to take a standard user from the Cloud Geezer business unit. We'll take Carl here and I'm just going to add him to a group. And if we just do AD Sync, check names, and probably better if I actually know the name of the group I set up. Here we are, Azure AD Cloud Sync, that was the name there. So let's just drop that out there. Remember that one for later as well. Okay, so he's in there, so we're just going to have Carl come through provisioning. Normally on a video I'd go back and correct that, but hey, you know what, it's real world, that's what happens. So let's just go back into our tenant now. Now, if we want to speed things up a bit, that would happen on its own. That over the next 2 minutes, it would then grab that and come in. And if I hit refresh and keep doing that, I'll see Carl turn up. But we can force it. What we can do is we can go into these agents and tell it that we want things to be a bit faster. We just hit the restart sync, as you can see what I was doing there. So I'll do that, hit restart sync, and that will force it to go and look for any changes, which it will go and find Carl and bring through. Remembering that obviously with domain replication across your different domain controllers, depending on where you make your change, obviously it's going to take a little bit to come through. Generally, we just let things happen organically and appear, but in a demonstration environment like this, we're just going to force things along a little bit. I've given that one a few minutes to do what it needed to do, and now if we just hit the logs here, we should see some activity. So what we're looking at here is, yes, we have some changes made. So we've got the Azure AD Cloud Sync, that's obviously the group name. It's got Carl as a member, and then you can see what it's done. If we go into these, it's provisioned Carl in the system. As you can see, it's updated him and added him, and you can look through some other things like what modified properties were and other steps that it took. So a bit of information that you can look at to help troubleshoot if you've got any issues with that. Now if we just jump back to the active users, then if I hit refresh on here, we should see, look at that, we have the group name obviously, and we have Carl turn up. Now this is a fairly standard one because Carl, if we look back at our AD structure, let's have a look at him. He is first name to last name at thecloudgeezer.com, and just jump back to our tenant. You can see that's what's come through here, really because in our domains, as you would have noticed before, cloudgeezer.com is set up, so there's not really any issue on that one. But let's have a look and let's grab one through and see it come through as a server 2022 as well. But I'm also going to add one from, if we look back at our DC, we have some of these people from blah blah blah. We've got Danger Mouse sitting here, and he is not a registered UPN on the domain. So let's see what happens when we put both Danger Mouse and somebody from the server 2022 inside that group. So I just let that one happen organically, and if we go back to our logs now, we should be able to see some people. So yes, we have Carl there, we have Ellie, we have Barley, we have Danger Mouse. So let's have a look and see what it has done on the front end here. So we can see Barley's come through. He's come through as just Barley at server2022.com. That's what his UPN is set on the local DC, so that's okay. But you can see Danger Mouse here has come through as the on Microsoft prefix because his domain doesn't exist on the tenant. But what I want to do with these two, you can see here we've got Barley, but we don't really want him to be just Barley. We want him as barley.lightfoot, and also we want Danger Mouse to be applied with a cloudgeezer.com as well. So there's a couple of transformation things we need to do here without affecting what's going on with Carl and Ellie. So let me just jump into the console of the agent here, and we'll go back to this item, and inside the config we go with the mappings, and we make some changes in the mapping of the user principal name, which is obviously right down the bottom here, and there's certainly some things we can do. So to make any updates, we just click on the little pencil over here, and you'll see it has an expression already, which is really saying if UPN already exists, then use that. If it doesn't, we'll use the SAM account name and join SAM account name with the FQDN of the domain, which will build that for us, and obviously an error if that's not present. So I want to change this completely, and we'll just cut and paste that. I always recommend you make a copy of these before you mess with them too much. But what I want to do with it is put it over the top. In this particular case, we're going to do this command, which is really just going to take the UPN that it's got and just splat basically the UPN with the cloudgeezer.com across the whole thing. Now this may not be totally the desired effect, but I want to show you what this does when we apply that. So let's apply that, and we'll save the schema and do that. We are going to come back and make some further changes to this to make this a bit better for our environment, but I'm just going to do this and hit the restart sync, and then we'll just come back in a couple of minutes and see what that has done to those accounts. Let's refresh our logs here and see if that's done what we need. Looks like it has. We have new times here. That's always a good indication. And jumping back to the active users, yes, you can see here we have Barley at the CloudGeezer and Danger Mouse at thecloudgeezer.com. It has taken that approach of just stamping the domain we want across there, which is perfectly acceptable. It may work for you. But what we want to do now is just take that a little bit further and give some other options in there. What we'd like to do with these accounts is we want to take Barley and we want him to be barley.lightfoot. We want Kyber to be kyber.dog, but we want to change the suffix. We want that to be server 2022. And also Danger Mouse likes to go by just DM. So in this sort of scenario, we need a bit more transformation work. What I'm going to do is make those changes on the local DC, and I'll show you those, and then I'll show you how we might get them up to the cloud and get these UPNs changed. Let's go in here. Now for Barley, what we're going to do is, with the advanced section here, you can see we've got attribute editor, and I'm going to go in and we're going to change extension attribute 1, which is not being used for anything right now. Really just pick one in your AD that is not being used, and you can do this. What we're going to do is we're going to put these in here and get the agent to pick up the value of extension attribute 1 and apply that as the UPN. So we just apply that. I'll do the same with Kyber, and you can see here, you can just put those in pretty quickly. Now you'd probably run a script over the top to grab them out of a sheet or whatever you'd like to do, but here I'm just going to put them in manually just for ease of use. And that's Kyber, and also with Danger Mouse here we'll put in extension attribute 1. Now here, as I say, it likes to go by just DM, so we put DM at cloudgeezer.com. There we go. So with those in place, I'm going to jump back into the console here. And what we'll do is we'll go into the agent, this one here, and edit the mappings again. Now instead of putting in a complicated expression if it exists or not, the nice thing is we can just edit this and change it to not an expression. We can make it a direct mapping, and the source attribute we'll put in as extension attribute 1, and it maps across to UPN. Very simple thing to do. What it will do though is if there is nothing in extension attribute 1, it will apply the UPN that comes from AD naturally. So it won't affect anybody that is already existing, like Carl and Ellie in that particular domain. So we'll just restart the sync now and come back to that in a second, see what it looks like. And a quick refresh here, you can see that that has now taken effect without changing any of the other UPNs. Now, this is great for a small subset of users, but when we're playing with things in a much larger setting, just to get the settings just right, it can be useful sometimes to provision just a single account and monitor it and see how it comes through. And that's what I was talking about before with that single provision user that was in the console. And that is in this area. Let me just go back into the config, and if we look here, you can see the validation, and that's the provisioner user. What this can do is it can take the mappings that you currently have, and you can put in the distinguished name of a user in here, and it will do a manual, effectively a manual setup of that one account, so you can see how it appears. You can bring a test account, a live user, whatever you want to do to test things, you can get it across. So what I've done on this side is I've created a test user. So our test user, Fred Smith here, we're going to bring him up. We do need to make him a member of that group, as you can see here. That's important. So he is definitely an in-scope user. In the attribute editor, we are going to look at his email address, which will come across to freddy.smith. We do need the DN, so we're going to grab that DN out of there, and we'll put that into the console. So we do that in here, provision a user, and we just paste that in and hit provision. And that'll go away and do that straight away for us. So we don't have to wait for a sync cycle and the like. If we just wait while it does it, it happens pretty quickly, and it will give us the results on what happened with Fred. It is a good way of testing these little scoping requirements. And you can see what it's done is it's got all his details here, but you can see the UPN is set to freddy.smith. So we can see in this case our expression or direct mapping is working correctly. So we can provision another if we need to. We just hit finish and come back. But it's a handy little tool to have. Last thing I want to mention before I leave you to it today is I want to go back to the front screen. You might have noticed this little guy has appeared. Now this is the on-prem to Azure Active Directory account that's been created by the system when we installed the agent. Now that means that this particular one here is not being used for the actual sync process. It's this one here. This one is what we put in there to do the setup with, so we didn't have to set it up with a GA account that we had ourselves. This can go. You can delete that one now if you finish setting things up. If you are adding more and more ADs into your tenant, then just hang on to it, use that as your account to do the setup, and then just go and remove them afterwards just for some good security. But yes, that's it for me today. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, visit my blog, thecloudgeezer.com, and above all, have fun playing with the new Azure AD Cloud Sync tool.